The Familistère in Guise in northern France, a few kilometers from the Belgian border. This unique experiment in utopian socialist architecture took place in France during the second half of the 19th century under the Second Empire. The Familistère was a town within a town. Home to more than 1,000 people, it offered its working-class population over 300 comfortable apartments and a range of services that were exceptional for the time. This internationally renowned project was visited by the writers Émile Zola and Hector Malot and commented on by Engels. Some 700 people still live in the Familistère today. May men treat us kindly, 1859. May God help us, 1859. 1859. The Industrial Revolution caused a massive population shift from the country to the towns. The new urban proletariat lived in extremely insalubrious conditions. The issue of decent housing for industrial workers arose. At this time, most workers' housing estates were privately funded ventures. Factory owners had an interest in keeping their still largely transient workforce close at hand. Jean-Baptiste André Gaudin, the founder of the Familistère, was not like other industrialists. Born in northern France in 1817, this former locksmith owed his fortune to a stove he invented and which bore his name. His factory opened in 1846 with a workforce of 30. 10 years later, there were 330 workers. A rural population recruited on the spot and for whom there was no existing housing. Gaudin, who remembered the dire conditions of his own life as a journeyman, was determined to improve their lot. Gaudin purchased 6 hectares of land nestled on a bend of the river Oise. A bridge would link the factory to the new dwellings. The Familistère faced the town and backed onto the countryside. To realize the project, the industrialist became an architect. Gaudin drew up the plans for his housing estate himself. Much more than an architect's drawing, the result was a veritable program, a catalogue of detailed instructions. The design was simple: 3 parallelograms linked by passages. In the center of each building was a huge courtyard covered by a glass roof. Each block was an independent housing unit, enabling Gaudin to stagger the building work over time. The left wing and the central block are still original. The right wing was rebuilt in 1923, long after Gaudin's death, in a different style. Ornate pavilions and rotunda contrast with the simplicity of the original. The old town of Guise looked down on the bold new housing estate, referring to it as a pile of bricks. With its inexpensive housing and shops, the Familistère was an unwelcome competitor. Furthermore, the town's bourgeoisie believed that the concentration of working-class families would become a den of iniquity, threatening their peaceful existence. Yet Gaudin saw these communal dwellings as the housing for the modern age. He offered its residents a range of otherwise inaccessible services, which he termed the equivalents of wealth. The ideal of progress, he said, must be embodied in a superior form of architecture, which shall be to the simple house what the factory is to the small workshop. These principles are driven by ideological concerns. Gaudin was an active social reformer. In his youth, he had discovered the writings of Charles Fourier in a newspaper article. Fourier, who died in 1837, was a prominent figure in what Marx termed the utopian socialist movement. Fourier had envisaged a new social order whose founding unit was a small community of people who lived and worked together in the same building, that he called a phalanstère or phalanstery. For Fourier, the phalanstery had to surpass palaces. He drew inspiration from the most beautiful palace known at the time, Versailles, with its layout of a central building flanked by wings enclosing a parade ground. Gaudin's initial drawing reflected this classical layout. He included a pinnacle similar to the one at Versailles, but later opted for a regional design found all over Flanders, the crow-stepped gable. 1865. Although the final wing had yet to be built, people still flocked to Guise to admire the new palace with its regal portals and surrounding wall. The outbuildings housing the Familistère's shops and stables took the place of the chateau's farm. But this palace was not intended for a king. There was no social hierarchy here. Workers, engineers, and the factory owner himself lived together in this social palace. The Familistère was made from brick, the region's traditional building material. Originally covered in white plaster, the brickwork is rudimentary yet meticulous. Gaudin used a different style of brickwork for the theater and schools. The motif, which has long since disappeared, made creative use of the basic materials. Simply by using different colored cement, red and white, Gaudin created a netted pattern, suggestive of honeycombs. Inspired by Fourier, who compared the inhabitants of the phalanstery to a swarm of bees, Gaudin adopted the beehive as the emblem of his estate. However, his design did not include what Fourier called the fourth wheel of the carriage, a new order of free love. As its name indicates, Gaudin's Familistère was designed for families. If we take away the facade, we notice that the basic structure of this communal dwelling is very like modern-day apartment buildings. A stack of identical stories, each one divided into spaces big enough for 2 apartments by a series of 10-meter-long firewalls. The concept is simple. The same entrance hall leads to 2 apartments. Each apartment comprises 2 large rooms, one behind the other. Each room is roughly 20 square meters, 4 meters wide and 5 meters long, with good 3-meter-high ceilings. But for Gaudin, the real luxury was more than just space. It was being able to arrange furniture in at least 2 ways. The corridor leading from the entrance hall contains built-in storerooms, which could also serve as washrooms. All the apartments could be extended from 2 rooms to 6 rooms, according to each person's needs and means. These days, most of the apartments have 4 rooms.
tiendrai pas. Marianne, je ne tiendrai pas.
Godin encouraged the tenants to make sensible use of this extendable feature. A young childless couple, he wrote, will be more conveniently accommodated in a single room. When the family is larger, they can occupy several rooms. Then, when the children marry, the lodgings can be scaled down in reverse proportions. To organize the movement of people within each block, Godin drew inspiration from hospitals and barracks, which were the only large buildings designed for communal living at that time. There's no sweeping palatial staircase, but 4 stairwells set back in the corners of the courtyard. This is the most functional position, leaving maximum light and space for the communal courtyard. Godin designed semicircular staircases, a shape he considered as the most convenient for all ages.
On the side closest to the banister, young children can climb the narrow steps by holding onto the railings. On the opposite side, adults will find the wider steps more suitable.
Movement on a horizontal plane is regulated by the walkways. These are 1.3 meters wide, sufficient for people to pass by one another easily without depriving the apartments below of light. These walkways were inspired by Fourier. Designed like indoor streets, they offer access to the apartments and protection from the elements and are ideal for encouraging encounters. Critics of communal housing condemned this style of open-plan architecture as the lack of privacy actively encouraged meetings of an immoral nature. At the center of each residential unit, the large courtyard with its glass roof plays the role of a village square, the place where everybody converges. Originally, the ground floor of these courtyards housed shops, a cafe, a library, and public baths. The residents' social needs were thus provided for in the sheltered environment of the Familistère. Experimentation and pragmatism underscore Godin's creation. In an era of ironwork structures, Godin chose a timber frame. 40 meters by 20, almost 1,000 square meters of glass resting on a traditional structure, a remarkable technical feat. The courtyard was also used for festive occasions. Each year, grand ceremonies were held to reinforce the residents' feeling of belonging to an elite. The balustraded walkways become balconies, wrote Godin, from which the residents can watch a magnificent show that will remind them of how far they have come since the squalid living conditions of separate dwellings. At the social palace, the working-class population attended special ceremonies in their honor without having to leave home. When there were no parties, the residents could watch the neighbors. For the other side of collective experience was surveillance. As Godin explained, the orderliness and good conduct of the residents stems from the absence of privacy. behavior in the Familistère was controlled by the watchful eye of the neighbors. Viewed from this angle, the courtyard and its walkways resemble another type of collective architecture, the prison. Anyone who infringed the Familistère's regulations was denounced by the others and fined. Those who persisted had their names and the nature of their offense displayed on a notice board. Madame Choquenet is fined 50 centimes for placing chairs on the third-floor balcony and for hanging washing on those chairs. Monsieur Eugène Ribot is fined 1 franc for urinating against the walls of the Familistère. He is fined an additional 50 centimes for tearing up the first notice. The man named Warocco is fined 10 francs for lodging Monsieur Jules Paudry, who had been expelled from the Familistère. The worst offenders were expelled. For Gaudin, amenities were an essential part of collective housing. He took 20 years to complete his workers' estate. 1859, completion of the first residential building. 1865, completion of the second residential building and the crèche behind it. Followed by the Économat, the Familistère shops, a farmyard, stables, and a vegetable garden. 1869, the schools and the theater. 1870, the laundry and the swimming pool. Finally, in 1870, the last of the residential wings was completed, 13 years after the central block. Gaudin's estate made him a pioneer of modern town planning. Fourier included a church in his plan for the phalanstery. Gaudin replaced it with a theater, which he built facing the residential blocks. Gaudin saw the theater as the factory that would mold the new man, the familistérien. Indeed, despite its intricate brickwork, the theater's architectural style is similar to that of a factory. The harmony of life in the Familistère was echoed in the theater, where deserving children put on plays. But Gaudin stressed that its role was to instill morals. Every Sunday, he gave lectures on morals to the residents. The turnout was often disappointing. Yet Gaudin was determined to educate the working class whom he saw as big children. It was not by coincidence that the schools for the children were placed on either side of the theater where the adults received education, like little workshops attached to the big factory. Originally, there was a crèche behind the central residential block. This, the smallest of the seats of learnings, was joined as if by an umbilical cord to the main building. Thus, the crèche, schools, and theater formed an educational axis running through the center of the estate. Gaudin thought of everything and controlled everything down to the minutest details of daily life. He designed the crèche and the school furniture, detailing the measurements with obsessive precision. The human body was like a yardstick. Length of the two forearms combined, the hands touching at the thumbs and held to the chest. Height of the leg from the floor to the back of the knee increased by 2 centimeters for the shoe, for children 1.23 meters tall, and by 3 centimeters for taller children. Height of the torso from above the bench where the pupil sits to the shoulder, the pupil having his arms crossed and outstretched. This extreme form of pragmatism revealed Godin's utopian ideals, a utopian world where everything could be measured, calculated, and reduced to a mathematical order. Still, Godin believed that architecture had to serve man. In the Familistère, all the apartments are illuminated and ventilated by large windows looking onto the outside and onto the courtyard. For Godin, the light filling the housing estate is a sign of the intellectual and moral progress of the generations who would be reborn to a new social enlightenment. It was essential that light permeate from the attic to the basement. A series of grates allowed light to enter the shop cellars located beneath the courtyard. Another technical problem that Godin solved was the risk of a greenhouse effect under the glass roof. He invented an early form of air conditioning. This simple and entirely natural system embodied Fourier's dream of a space with a temperate climate all year round. Air entered the cellar via large vents, where it formed a reservoir of cool air in the summer, warm air in the winter. This air was then redistributed in the courtyard through lateral vents. Openings in the glass roof meant that air circulated constantly. Another, less spectacular yet lasting invention was this rubbish chute. Godin also brought running water to the Familistère. Each floor had a water fountain and toilets, making the Familistère more comfortable than the majority of bourgeois apartments in Paris at the time. The amenities of the Familistère were designed to reflect abundance. As opposed to individual houses where economizing is essential, here everything is conceived on a large scale for the good of all, explained Godin. The social palace should not be sparing with the gifts that nature makes freely to man. And what was not provided by nature, Godin ingeniously supplied with his own resources. He channeled hot water from the factory to the laundry, which housed the public baths, and, the height of luxury, a swimming pool. Air, space, light, the essential human needs that underscored Godin's architecture. A century later, Le Corbusier took up the same themes in his Cité radieuse, a collective housing unit reflecting the principles defined by Godin. A year before he died, Godin built another Familistère for his factory at Laeken, near Brussels. Crammed onto a narrow patch of land, the single building never achieved the grandiose proportions of the original. Godin died in 1888. He bequeathed his factory and the Familistère to the association he had created to succeed him, and which functioned along the lines of a workers' cooperative. The association lasted nearly a century. In 1968, the Familistère was purchased by a large corporation which kept the factory and sold off the rest. The amenities were purchased by the state and the municipality. The individual apartments were sold, and now the Familistère is a block like any other, with owners and tenants. The latest residents' meeting voted the closure of the passages.
One can develop plans in books, but when it comes to putting them into practice, one has to confront the contradictory desires of men. The rare attempts at social reform have so often met with failure that social reformers are dismissed as dreamers. Perhaps the same is said of me, but I have been a man of action. I have made my thoughts reality. I put them into practice before theorizing. I cannot be accused, therefore, of remaining in the realm of utopia.
Imagine now the courtyards, the passages, and the walkways. They're perfect for moving ahead, getting lost, finding one's way again. Children took over this unique space, which despite its simplicity and its shortcomings, represented the labyrinths cherished by Fourier, an architectural structure which did without architects. Today, it is the familistère which makes architects dream, perhaps because here, architecture was able to change the world.